is Julian Blackman came in for a visit after visiting the Buffalo Bills and leaving without a deal. And this one got interesting. So, first of all, just to set the stage, Mike Silver has been pretty spot on with a lot of the stuff he said this offseason. But one of the things that he said a couple weeks ago was there was no guarantee that Talanoa Hufanga was going to be the starter this year. And a lot of people brushed that off. But if you think about it, Talanoa Hufanga is not the most athletic guy in the world, right? He's kind of playing above his draft position already. And he's coming off of a major injury. He's going into the final year of his deal. Would the 49ers consider replacing him? Well, we might have gotten our answer today with them bringing in Julian Blackman, who's a very good coverage safety. He's had some injuries himself, but he's only 25 years old. Larry, we'll start with you on this one. What do you think about bringing in Blackman for a free agency visit? And is he here to play alongside Huff? And are they looking at a 3 safety look? Or do you think that they're looking to replace Huff on the fly?
Well, I just think that the 49ers are keenly aware that Huff has had a lot of injuries going back to SC. So it's not just that, oh, yeah, he's been hurt. He's hurt now, and he's coming off an ACL, and he may not be ready to start. Can you really depend on him? I almost feel like you've got to plan like you don't have him and let him surprise you if he can go. So, yeah, I think there's a real concern in 49er land at the safety position. I think safety is kind of the one spot that they're not really fortified. I mean, Jair Brown's nice, but is he a strong safety? Is he a free safety? Hufanga's a good player, but is he healthy? And, can he play coverage down the field? I just think, and then George Odom is their third safety. He's not really a from scrimmage player. He's a great special teamer. So, I and then you're looking at Taylor Hawkins and Eric Harris. I mean, guys who are more in that kind of, what do you want to call it? They're kind of in the developmental part of the game. I mean, they're more like practice squad type players. So I think they really do have a need, not just at backup safety. They have a need at start, for the starters. And a guy like Blackman's interesting. He's got good size, good speed, and he's not just a body. He's going to get a significant amount of money wherever he goes. There's a bunch of teams interested, and I think they like the Utah safeties. And it sounds like they not only do they like Blackman, they're also interested in the Utah safety that's coming out in this draft. So, we'll see. I think that's underrated need for the 49ers is safety.
Interesting. Vish, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a need as well. I think it's not a need because of anything to do with whether Talanoa Hufanga is good or not. I saw that debate going on Twitter. I think that conversation is particularly independent of this one because I think the 49ers are kind of in a funny spot at safety right now. And that's because Hufanga is in a contract year coming off of a serious injury with what Larry described as vast injury history. Now, the issue for Hufanga is, yes, he had a first-team All-Pro season just 2 years ago, and that might have garnered him in extension talks this offseason, but that injury and him not playing as well last year kind of threw the entire situation off, because I don't know if the 49ers have delegated cap room thinking about a long-term contract for Talanoa Hufanga at this point. Just he's coming off of injury. He's already in a contract year. They have other guys who need to be paid. So that is the situation for him. And then people are interested in Jair Brown. They're intrigued by his skill set. They talk about him getting an interception in the Super Bowl, though I caution people because Tarvarius Moore also got an interception once in the Super Bowl. And so that's not an indicator of whether he's a good or bad football player. That's just a stat in the game. I'm not sure if you can 100% say that next year you can walk into the season with him as the starter at safety. There was a lot of inconsistency at the end of last year. He showed flashes of talent. Certainly he's a young player you would want to ascend, but I don't know that you can 100% say he's your starter at safety going into next year Hufanga's coming off of an injury. Blackman's a really good player with post versatility. He's played free safety, and he's also got versatility to play in the box. He has scheme familiarity playing for Gus Bradley and Matt Eberflus, similar schemes in different ways to the 49ers. He is a good fit. He is a good player. I don't necessarily know if the money is going to work because, like Krug said, he's a good player. A lot of people are interested in him. He's going to get starter money. But safety is somewhat of a need because the 49ers right now don't have a long-term starter set in stone beyond this next year. Hufanga is contractually not there beyond next year. And then Brown hasn't established himself, though we think he has the potential to do that.
I think, what's interesting to me is, as soon as I saw that Blackman was coming in, I tweeted out something along the lines of, Blackman's not here to be the third guy like Gibson. He's here to be a starter. He's the 49ers know this. They know that he's a starting safety. So you can look at that however you want, but he's here to take Huff's job. It's pretty clear to me that that is the case. You don't bring him in to be the third guy and give you depth. He's going to get a starting job. Now, whether you want to look at that and say, okay, well, maybe Huff's the starter and Tig's the young kid, so he needs to still prove himself. Maybe that's the way that you want to look at it. But to me, if you're bringing in Blackman, that's basically saying like, hey, we're not happy with our starters. We're willing to upgrade them on the fly, whatever that looks like. And I also want to say, and Larry, you probably know this because you dig deeper into the draft than anybody, the 2025 safety class looks really deep and really good. So the 49ers theoretically could come in and say, okay, we're willing to let Huff either walk or trade him. And now we can go with Tig and Blackman. And then next year we can draft another safety to develop on the fly. And maybe, Blackman only signs a 2-year deal. You let him go after that time. And then you bring in that new safety and develop him. I just think that there's so many ways they can go with this, but it's not a foregone conclusion that Huff's going to be here and be paid, especially coming off that injury. And again, we're not talking about a guy who won on his athletic ability. So if you're taking that down a notch again, that is a little bit worrisome. And I can understand why the 49ers would be kicking the tires on bringing in somebody to compete or take his job.
I'll add something to it because I have a different angle for you on it. Because I agree with you on the long term. But I think in the short term, this is the guy to start with Hufanga. Because to me, Brown and Hufanga are actually a little bit more similar just based on how I saw Brown play last year. To me, Blackman and Brown is a better duo than Hufanga and Brown, and Blackman and Hufanga is a better duo than Hufanga and Brown. Like, I think Blackman offers something a little bit different than Hufanga and Brown. So the way I am kind of looking at this conversation is if you're able to bring Blackman in, then you look at Brown as your long-term replacement for Hufanga, and you don't have to Drake Jackson Brown either. You can give Brown some time to develop. You can give him a veteran to develop alongside of. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I don't know that Hufanga's job gets taken away in the short-term interim, though anytime a player doesn't have contractual security, that can happen, right? Because you're not long-term invested in him anymore. They are more long-term invested in Brown at this point. But that's kind of how I view it, because I even if Talanoa Hufanga returns to playing how he played in the first 8 games of 2022, I think that the 49ers are in a difficult spot to offer him a long-term deal. And that's why sniffing around Julian Blackman makes sense. Because whether Hufanga is back to being excellent or whether you don't think he's that good, it's going to be really hard to keep him on this team 2024 and beyond.
I think we're also kind of missing I think the biggest point so far, which is that if you really go and evaluate Jair Brown and Talanoa Hufanga, they're both strong safeties. I mean, they're both in the box. I mean, Jair Brown has got good production numbers. He can catch the ball down the field, but that's more along the lines of like a Tayshaun Gibson. He's got a great nose for the ball. Having a great nose for the ball doesn't mean you're a great cover man. I don't see a great cover man in Jair Brown. I see a guy will hit you in the box and be a really good strong safety and has a great nose for the football. So I think they need a free safety. And if you look at Julian Blackman once upon a time was a corner. So he's got that coverage ability. I think they're most concerned about their lack of coverage ability at that safety spot. Odom's a great special team tone setter, not a free safety. Eric Harris and Taylor Hawkins is probably the closest they have to a free safety, and he's really never played there. I mean, he played corner at in San Diego State's 4-2-5. He was an outside corner who played the boundary a lot. So I just think they're looking at their safeties and going, you know what? We don't know about the health of Hufanaga. We don't think that any of these other guys can really be a free safety. And we're not really sure if Brown's best as a free safety either. So let's see if we can go after a free safety in Blackman and maybe get a starter. That's the way I read it.
I got another name for you guys if that's the angle then too. I mean, Quandre Diggs is still out there as a free agent. That to me would be like bringing Gibson in at the end. I don't know that Quandre Diggs is going to go for a lot of money. Quandre Diggs has been a great player for a long time. He would
First of all,
certainly fit
I'm mad at you. I'm mad at you.
Were
And
you
this
going there?
it's not your fault because
Okay.
you don't know the topics ahead of time. But I was gonna bring him up in a later topic,
Okay.
but this is good because we completely agree, and we might say the same guy, but it's pretty funny. Maybe we should talk about the topics beforehand so we don't overlap next time, huh?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe we
But-
shouldn't spend the first 4 minutes backstage of the show discussing Larry's son voting for Chase Sr. instead of him.
It's a bad moment.
that might
Bad
be a good
moment for the
start.
kid.
Might be a good start. Okay, so here was another thing that was suggested though on Twitter was, all right, well, maybe they're bringing in Blackman because he can do what Ward did his final year and kind of be your slot corner, and they can play all three safeties together. Do you see a world where that happens, Vish? You don't seem too impressed with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people are underrating how good Jimmy Ward was to be able to do something like that. I don't think that's as easy a transition as people realize, especially if you're going to have to force your nickel to play some man coverage. And that was the big problem for the Niners with Isaiah Oliver, right? He couldn't run. Like Jimmy Ward was a guy the 49ers in 2018 moved to be their starting outside corner. You know how you have to be able to run to start outside at corner in the NFL? Like there's a reason guys play safety and not play corner. Like there's an athleticism threshold for that. I don't necessarily like just suggesting that you can put guys out there that way. This isn't Madden. You need a designated player to play the nickel position. I don't look at, maybe they can play some three safety looks, but I don't look at, oh, it's sustainable in the NFL to sit in three safety looks unless you're going to do what the Cowboys do and make your linebackers safeties on nickel downs. Then that's totally different, right? If you're going to put 220-pound Donovan Wilson or J-Ron Curse as your will linebacker in those situations, okay, that's very different positionally. But I don't necessarily love that, guys. How do you feel?
Go ahead, Larry.
I think the three safety look is personnel specific. It's like it depends who you're matching up with which week, and maybe you have a health situation or maybe you have a certain matchup you feel like you can do. But I agree with Vish. I think that Jimmy Ward had a very special skill set, which was why I really didn't want to see him leave, because I think Jimmy Ward is the kind of guy that you could play at nickel, you could play at free safety, strong safety, you could stick him on the line of scrimmage at or a stack backer position at weak side backer. Mm-hmm. He could man that. He could play the nickel. He could be in a three safety look. I mean, if you want it, he's just a very unique player who had the size and strength of a linebacker, but the coverage ability and quick feet of a corner. It's just a hard thing to replicate. So unless you have that special player, in some ways, I think Lenore, can do a lot of those things too, as he shows more as a hitter. Mm-hmm. But I think they really want another safety who can cover and going into the draft. And then if they can then I think they'll probably, they've been looking at Malik Mustafa from Wake Forest, who's a real thumper, but he also has the ability to kind of play the free safety role, and he can play the deep center, the deep third in a cover three type situation. So I think safety is definitely going to be a spot there looking at the rest of this offseason. I don't know, though, that anybody's going to sit in three safeties for any extended period of time.
Yeah, I agree. But okay, well, let's go down the path that I kind of suggested, which is they're looking to replace Huff. And let's say they bring in Blackman and they do look to ship Huff out and maybe draft another safety, as you're suggesting, Larry. What would Huff be worth in a trade? Start with you, Larry.
Right now, you mean, as he's hurt and
Yeah.
kind of coming off a year where I would say he's probably just worth like a 4th round pick, maybe a 5th.
That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that his value is all that too much just because, teams are reluctant at this point to pay safeties unless we're talking about like a Buda Baker or one of those Javon Holland, one of these guys that's like an all-pro type player. And so he's also coming off of an injury as well. It makes his market very hard to tell. But I think that the Blackman flirting and all of this ultimately comes down to less about trying to trade Hufanga, because I don't even know that if that really makes them equitably better to get a 5th or 6th at this point for Hufanga rather than let him walk for a comp pick a year later. It more goes to show that contractually, barring him just blowing them away this season and changing how they have to react to his future, I don't think he's a part of their future plans right now.
I tend to agree. Dariush guy says
the one guy who would love him is D'Amico, because I mean, just from being at practice, I mean, he was always out there early with D'Amico. D'Amico knows how he's wired, and I'm sure they're really close. Maybe D'Amico would see value in him that somebody else wouldn't. And I would say that if the Niners were going to move him, I would almost bet $1 to a dime it's to Houston.
And I'll say this about Hufanga too, because he's got an opportunity still to play out this year and change our minds. And I think the one place where he's going to be able to create value for himself is with no Dre Greenlaw next year. There is an opening for this 49ers defense on who's going to bring the energy. Who's going to be the guy that they rally behind, right? Greenlaw has kind of been their infectious energy on defense. Jimmy Ward, Krug, you talked about just the aggressive thumping, the way they would get guys to play around them with how physical they are and how aggressive they are. Hufanga has got that kind of energy. He is a guy that runs around. He's a guy that's infectious. He's a guy that's aggressive. He's a guy that gets other people to play faster because of the way he's playing. His energy helps his teammates. Maybe he's able to bounce back, have a really good season, and make himself invaluable to the 49ers because they need his intangible effect on their defense. And that would change this conversation completely a year from now.